It's reality. It's not real, is what I'm trying to say. And neither of these Pokemon are not real, and you're walking around the real world doing non-real stuff.
What did interest me on this was just an observation, and that was the actual visual detail of it is extremely poor. I kind of thought we're still at a point where the best visuals were going to lead on such things. That the uncanny valley where, the animation was so real that it took your eye away from the message. Maybe there's something in that, but that's a philosophical thing.
Yeah, but there's just some. I do get this. I think it's kind of, on one hand, nuts, but you can see there's this. You look at this. Your phone is showing you a shot of a real world right in front of you, and yet there's something only you can see there.
But quite
something
pixelated
kind of
in a sense when you consider some of the, the real high resolution gaming things that are out there. Yeah. Maybe there's that's what I'm getting at. Maybe there's something in that.
But it's just, I don't think the quality actually matters in this. It's the imagination of it. I mean, think about Tron. The whole idea of being in the video game is just a really cool thing to think of. And I just think that's what it is. It's people, that's the video game come to life. I am in the game.
Because everyone thought it was a nostalgia-led thing, but it's not. The kids are leading this.
Yeah, the kids are leading it. And on the one hand, our twins love it. They're outdoors and they're all milling and conversing. On the other hand, 2 teens shot in Florida, mistaken for burglars, and those stories were... How game-changing do you reckon it is? Because it's augmented reality. It's not virtual, isn't it? In the ways you two describe.
Well, I think what Tim is describing is going to be the hub of something that's going to be well analysed, and perhaps something will come out of that where like the Second Life in the first instance, this type of thing where, augmented reality, connecting to the digital and the real. It's almost getting to in a concept kind of way with attachments on the human being, the cyborg kind of phenomenon of some years ago, theorising, where we were going with different online cultures.
It's where that blurs the line of what's real, which is fascinating for the human imagination. I mean, there's a certain bar humbug part of me which just goes, if you want to get outside, and do something actually tangibly useful in the world, go and dig your next door neighbour's garden or something. That would at least be, this real. The lack of
real good.
And real good, which is, I get this is real fun, but it would be no. But that's very bar humbug, so I won't say that.
There was a hook for the Pokemon story today, apart from that sign in the yard, but I've forgotten what the other hook was. Anyway, we've talked about it. It feels, I know Jessie did a couple of, but it's been amazing how quick it was.
So quick.
Amazing. It feels important, before we go, we should mention perhaps the sad killing of Kandil Baloch, the Pakistani social media celebrity killed by her brother in an apparent honour killing. There are many cases of women being killed for dishonouring their families on the subcontinent, as was referred to before 4 o'clock, actually. Kandil Baloch is being referred to as the Kim Kardashian of Pakistan, but she was far less raunchy. Were you aware of her presence? She was just bold, basically. Yeah. She was a bold woman on social media, speaking her mind, criticising the patriarchy, and for that she's killed by her brother. But it wasn't just her brother. There was a storm against her. There were court cases brought against her for lewdness and many death threats before she actually died. When the march of civilization encounters cultural impasses like this, how on earth can they be overcome?
Well, it is. It's the absolute. I joked earlier about the family's underneath everything, and we should look after the family. This is when the family goes bad, isn't it? It's when the family's so important to you that the sense that she was disgracing the family meant that she had to die.
How are we going to easily accommodate the ingrained attitudes of that kind of society or that part of society?
Well, you don't. You don't accept that. I think there are times where there are universal morals that are above culture, and you actually say sorry. And this is always a difficult conversation to have because people, hold very close to their traditions. But there are times where you say, actually, culture needs to change. Culture does not have a free pass.
And I think our own cultures have faced these same dilemmas not that long ago, and how we got through them, and are we still going through them? Religion, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you both for a very lively panel today. Tim Watkin.
Cheers, Jim.
Selwyn Manning. Thank you, Selwyn.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, everybody. And the panel returns tomorrow. Now it's Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, ko John Campbell aho, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tau te maira e hoa mā, he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight, steel dumping and the politics of responding to it when it's done by our second largest trading partner. And speaking of trade diplomacy, we cross to our reporter who's with the PM in Indonesia. 3 dead in a terrible crash on the desert road. Our reporter has just spoken to police. Russia, doping and the Olympics with a major report just hours away. We look at what's at stake here. Trailers overboard, a wild old journey across Cook Strait. 3 police officers shot dead in Baton Rouge. Fergal Keane reports from Turkey. Lydia Ko wins again. And the man they call the Tongan Bear tells us about his journey to rugby's quarterfinals. All of that and more in the next 89 minutes. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The teenager accused of fatally stabbing another in the neck with a smashed beer bottle has been found guilty of manslaughter and not guilty of murder. Vincent Angine Skeen, who's 18, had admitted using a beer bottle during a fight with Luke Tipene on Halloween night in 2014, but had denied ever intending to kill. Several members of Luke Tipene's family wept before leaving court. Skeen's lawyers said their client had acted impulsively, but the Crown said Skeen had literally gone for the jugular and struck Mr Tipene 7 times. The fight happened in front of numerous witnesses, including onlookers on the balcony of a nearby apartment block. Skeen will be sentenced in August. A passenger on the ferry where 2 trailer units crashed through the barrier and into rough seas has described the Cook Strait trip as crazy. Bluebridge has launched an immediate investigation after the refrigerated trailers fell off the Straitsman ferry from Picton to Wellington this morning. Bluebridge says the trailers, which were carrying chilled goods including pork, were lashed for a storm and it's unclear why they moved. They weren't attached to a truck cab. French tourist Séverin Damancourt says it was a frightening ride and people were sick.
The waves become bigger and bigger. At the beginning it was funny, but after the waves began bigger and bigger, so everybody felt sick and threw up, and the boat went up and went down. The ferry was on the side, maybe 45 degrees.
Séverin Damancourt says it was the worst ferry ride he's been on. Maritime New Zealand has issued a navigational hazard warning. A hunter who was missing in the Blue Mountains near Balclutha since Saturday has been described as being in remarkable condition despite his ordeal. A police search and rescue team found the hunter this afternoon after he became separated from his hunting party on Saturday. Constable Murray Hewitson told RNZ's Checkpoint it was the man's first time hunting in that part of the country. He'd recently moved from the North Island to the South Island and was not familiar with the weather or the terrain. Mr Hewitson says for what he's been through, the hunter is a lucky man. Regional security and the threat of terrorist attacks will be high on the agenda when the Prime Minister meets his Indonesian counterpart Joko Widodo this evening. John Key is in Indonesia for a 2-day visit with the Trade Minister, Todd McClay, and a business delegation. He says given a terrorist attack in Indonesia earlier this year and one last week in Nice, global security will be top of mind for the 2 leaders. He says every global leader is concerned at the moment about the rise of Islamic State.
And their capacity to sort of want to recruit these, individual soldiers or supporters, if you like, anywhere around the world, and also of the issue of returning foreign fighters. So both Indonesia and France potentially have quite large numbers of foreign fighters, and that presents an added complication for them.
John Key, who's now in Jakarta. The gunman who killed 3 United States law enforcement officers in the city of Baton Rouge had posted video messages complaining about the treatment of African Americans by police. The gunman has been identified as 29-year-old Gavin Long, a former United States Marine and Iraq veteran. Long also used the online alias of Cosmo and posted video messages on the internet calling for black men to make sacrifices for their race. He also called for black people to fight back through bloodshed. The shooting comes in the wake of widespread protests over the police killing of 2 black men and the attack on police in Dallas, in which 5 officers died. Police officers are liaising with embassies in New Zealand to try to identify the 3 foreigners who died in a crash on the desert road this morning. The police say their sedan crossed the centre line and collided with a truck about 7:30. The driver survived but is in a critical condition in Waikato Hospital's intensive care unit. Senior Sergeant Fane Troy says all are now aged in their mid-20s, but he's not sure how they knew each other. Mr. Troy says the police are trying to contact next of kin and he expects to be able to release their names tomorrow. He says the serious crash unit is investigating. In sport, flashbacks of the US Open, which slipped from her grasp a week ago, taunted women's world golf #1 Lydia Ko as she battled for victory in the latest LPGA Tour event in Ohio. On her final 9 holes, Ko carded 2 bogeys and missed a birdie putt on the final hole, which would have given her the tournament. Instead, she had to play the 18th hole 4 more times in a sudden death playoff with the 2 other players. At the US Open a week ago, Ko led during the final round only to slip to 3rd, and she felt the same was about to happen again.
Was just kind of slipping slightly more and more away through the back 9, and I said, hopefully it's not like what happened a few weeks ago.
Meanwhile, Lydia Ko, Danny Lee and Ryan Fox have been named in the New Zealand Olympic golf team for Rio. Russia could face a complete Olympic ban if allegations of state-sponsored doping at the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics are proven. An independent commission set up by the World Anti-Doping Agency has been investigating the claims and is due to publish its findings tonight. Russian track and field athletes are banned from international competition, including the Rio Games, although individual athletes can compete as neutrals if they prove they're clean. The New Zealand driver and defending IndyCar Series champion Scott Dixon has finished 8th at the latest round in Toronto. Dixon is 4th in the overall drivers' standings. That's the news.
France's crowning glory.
For any man to spend that kind of money on his hair is absolutely ridiculous.
America's Clown Prince.
With Trump almost even in the polls and Boris Johnson bringing Europe together, I've been looking up plane reservations to New Zealand myself.
A Kiwi anthem.
Gives a sense of self, gives a sense of who we are. That's us, that's us, Aotearoa.
From Paris to Patia, Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then after 9, news as it happens. In-depth conversations with world-leading experts and the latest trends you need to know about. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, occasional showers, turning to rain tomorrow evening with westerly strengthening. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country, showers tomorrow, turning to rain in the afternoon or evening with possible thunderstorms in the west, westerly strengthening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, remaining showers clearing tonight, scattered rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North and Central Otago, showers about Banks Peninsula and Kaikoura until evening, scattered rain for a time tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, a period of heavy rain tomorrow, followed by showers and possible thunderstorms. Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, showers clearing, further rain or showers at times tomorrow with westerly strengthening. And the Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Busy old checkpoint tonight. We're going to go live to Indonesia. Shortly, and we're going to have the latest on this verdict, this manslaughter verdict in the Luke Tepini trial. But we are going to begin with the government being asked to explain why Chinese officials appear to know more than officials in this country about an investigation into the alleged dumping of surplus steel. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says it cannot confirm or deny whether it has received 2 complaints from New Zealand steel producers about Chinese steel flooding the New Zealand market. Reports say the Chinese government is threatening trade retaliation if the complaints are even investigated. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says the complaints are very serious and it's worrying that China has already caught wind of them. He wants to know how that has happened.
It may be that the government has told the Chinese via their officials that this investigation was happening. But whatever it is, the government's been pretty silent on the inference that they were either told, that is the Chinese government, that this was happening, or second, there's been a leak of some sort.
The Labour Party's finance spokesperson, Grant Robertson, says it isn't proper that China has found out about the complaints before the ministry has been able to investigate.
Going down the path of the anti-dumping type approach, you've got to be very careful, you've got to have all your ducks in a row, do the investigation before the other country becomes involved, and this process looks very messy.
The Trade Minister, Todd McClay, says he doesn't have any concerns with steel imports from China, but he has asked officials to investigate the allegations and report to him.
We have very clear legislation in New Zealand, and so whether dumping takes place or not is an investigation that MB must decide to look at themselves. I mean, it's very important that politicians and ministers aren't involved in that decision. It's actually officials and MB that look at it, and I think the legislation is very clear when it comes to deciding whether dumping is taking place or not. I mean, incidentally, there has not been a dumping case taken in New Zealand for quite a long period of time.
Winston Peters says it's not surprising there are complaints about inferior steel being imported from China. In June, RNZ News revealed that 1,600 tonnes of steel imported for 4 new bridges in Waikato was weak and not up to standard.
From ladders to so-called aluminium fencing equipment, which is not capable of lasting 2 or 3 years without rusting. And a lot of it's happening, and the industries know about it. And so do the politicians. So I don't know why the government is in such steadfast denial when it's commonly understood out in the commercial and business and the trading world.
The Chinese embassy has not responded to requests for comment. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
Coming up to 12 minutes past 5, Indonesia's use of the death penalty, growing problems with global terrorism, and another major trade dispute. These are just a few of the items on the Prime Minister John Key's discussion list when he meets with the Indonesian President in about 5 hours' time from now. At the same time, Mr Key and his Trade Minister Todd McClay are also fielding ongoing questions about that potential trade disagreement between China and New Zealand over steel trade, steel dumping, precisely what Demelza was just discussing. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell joins us now live from Jakarta. Chris, lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much. Can we begin with this China and New Zealand steel dumping dispute? Obviously, the government is tiptoeing around delicately here. Where's it at?
So at the moment, the Minister Todd McClay, as he said in Demelza's package, has gone to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and asked them to go to the Chinese embassy to have a discussion at the official level. Now, we're going to be having a press conference with Todd McClay in about 2 hours' time, so I expect we'll get an update on that. He said as well that in terms of the investigation, if a complaint has been laid with MB, that can't be made public. But if an investigation has been launched, then that would be made public. So at this stage, we can assume pretty safely that an investigation hasn't been launched. But of course, as Demelza said, we don't know whether or not a complaint has been laid. I understand Fairfax Media is reporting that Pacific Steel has laid a complaint, but the ministry itself is being very tight-lipped. Now, I did ask Todd McClay whether or not he was concerned about this alleged practice of dumping by China. Now, this is actually when they sell surplus steel into the market under cost. He said that he has no concerns about that at this stage. There is very clear legislation around that in New Zealand, and it's up to the ministry to look at that. And he also kind of tried to keep it at arm's length a bit, saying that really ministers and politicians should try to stay out of what is at this stage at the official level.
Yes, I suspect he would say that, all things considered. Of course, another thing very much under discussion up there is the New Zealand-Indonesia situation, where there's quite a serious trade dispute before the World Trade Organisation. Chris, can you background this dispute and how bad it has been for New Zealand's meat sector?
So this goes back to about 2012. In 2012, New Zealand went into a free trade agreement, or it came into effect, with Indonesia and 10 other nations. It's a regional agreement. At that stage, a number of tariffs were reduced, but at the same time, Indonesia then threw up a whole lot of non-tariff barriers, like quotas, like serious kind of regulatory restrictions, making it really difficult for the New Zealand beef exporters to get their product into the market. Now, that's seen beef exports, which Indonesia used to be our second largest market for beef, They've gone in 2010, they've dropped by 95% in 2015. That's had a more than $1 billion effect on the sector. So that's now before the WTO. New Zealand took a joint case with the United States. A disputes panel was appointed last year, and that's expected to report back later this year. Now, John Key will certainly be discussing this with President Widodo when he meets with him in about 5 hours' time, as you said. So they won't obviously come to any resolution, but I think John Key will be making it very clear how difficult it's been.
Chris, what else will John Key be discussing with the Indonesian president? The human rights record, West Papua, the death penalty, are those sorts of things on the agenda?
Absolutely. Whenever John Key meets with a leader of a nation that has a questionable human rights record, as a matter of course, he always raises human rights. In this case, though, he said he will be talking about New Zealand's very deep opposition to the death penalty, and he will be raising the matter of Papua. He said that under this president, President Widodo, who was only elected in 2014, that he is trying to take a more transparent approach with the issues around Papua, so they may have a more open and frank discussion than has been had in the past with Indonesian leadership. There will also be some discussions around the rise of Islamic State, and for Indonesia, they have a real issue with foreign fighters coming back to Indonesia, which is a big concern for others in the region, including New Zealand. After that, the two leaders will hold a joint media conference, and then they'll go off to a fancy state banquet.
Chris Brownwell live from Jakarta. Thanks so much, Chris. Apologies for the audio dropping out a little bit on that, but we wanted to speak to Chris while we had her. Obviously, that meeting's taking place at 10 p.m. New Zealand time. The Morning Report will have the audio from the joint media conference tomorrow morning. Let's go to this Luke Tepini case. His mother wept and left court as the teenager who stabbed her son was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. Just before 4 o'clock this afternoon, lawyers for 18-year-old Vincent Skeen conceded at his trial that their client armed himself with a broken bottle and swung it at Luke Tepini in a Greyland street fight on Halloween night in 2014. But they argued he had no intention to kill and that he acted impulsively. The Crown said Skeen literally went for the jugular and struck Luke at least 7 times. Our Auckland Court reporter Edward Gay has been following the trial and filed this report.
Vincent Skeen appeared unemotional as the jury returned verdicts of not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. In contrast, Luke Tepini's mother and other whānau wept and left court before Her Honour Justice Peters had a chance to thank them for their attendance. Luke Tepini had a promising rugby league career ahead of him. Educated at Ngā Kakano o Te Kaihanga Kura in Henderson, he was fluent in Te Reo and he played for the Glenora Club in West Auckland. Outside court, his uncle Sean Wilson spoke of the whānau's disappointment at today's verdict, but said the family must respect the jury's decision.
This has been very traumatic, particularly for my sister to relive this whole process again. No parent should go through that twice. All testament to my sister for enduring this.
Luke had been earmarked for the Auckland Warriors development squad. The hooker or loose forward had also been named as the Auckland Rugby League's Under-17 Player of the Year after his Glenora Bears side won the Under-17s premiership. He had also been selected for the New Zealand Māori Under-17 side and was known for his kapa haka. Mr Wilson was asked what it was like having to listen to the details of Luke's last moments.
Oh look, traumatic, and I'm not using that word lightly, for my sister sitting there listening to the graphic details of what occurred. As I said, no parent wants to go through that and relive that whole process again.
He told media no one is a winner today, but the family have to keep Luke's memory alive. In her closing address, Justice Peters started by addressing the two families who've crowded the public gallery over the length of the 2-week trial.
Can I start first of all by thanking the families of both the Tepini family and the Skeen family. I think both of you have conducted yourselves with great dignity over the last week, and you're to be commended for that, because no doubt some of the evidence was very trying for you both.
She then urged jurors to put aside any feelings of sympathy or prejudice.
Everyone in this courtroom wishes this fight had never happened. You might think young people drink too much, they're too quick to have a fight. Put all of that to one side. It's not your concern. Your only job is to decide the issues which will determine your verdict.
The jurors took 5 hours to return their verdicts. Skeen will be sentenced in August. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay tēnei.
Passengers on a Cook Strait crossing had a white knuckle ride this morning. White faces too, I suspect. Some people pretty sick after a truck's trailer unit crashed through the ferry's barriers in pretty rough seas. Bluebridge has launched an investigation and says nothing like this has happened before. Kate Gudsall reports.
The two linked trailers containing frozen pork fell off the Straitsman ferry from Picton to Wellington, despite being secured by storm lashings. French tourist Séverin Damancourt was on the ferry and says initially the sea was calm.
The waves become bigger and bigger. At the beginning it was funny, but after the waves began bigger and bigger, so everybody felt sick and threw up, and the boat went up and went down. The ferry was on the side, maybe 45 degrees.
Mr. Damancourt says the ferry ride was crazy. He didn't see the containers go overboard, but says at first people were not sure whether it was a piece of cargo or a person who'd fallen off.
Member staff say to another member staff, "Oh, there's something fell off of the ferry," and after passenger go in on the ferry, go on the cabin, and say, "Oh, there's a big truck fell off of the ferry."
Mr. Damancourt says he's been on several ferry rides, but this was the worst.
And everybody inside was white. Yeah, many people threw up, and children cried.
Bluebridge's General Manager Commercial, Ed Menzies, said in a statement that it's unclear why the trailer moved and broke the railings. He said vehicles and freight are lashed to the freight deck on every sailing. No crew were injured and no one was on the freight deck at the time. Bluebridge cancelled its next sailing and put people on its rival, the Inter-Islander. Alex was one of those people, but he wasn't told why his sailing was cancelled.
I asked them why, and they said, "Oh, it's choppy, high seas. Inter-Islander's got bigger boats that can go in stronger swell."
He says the seas were looking rough from the Wellington harbour.
In the bay, it was looking a little bit choppy, and that's a good indication that there's going to be a large swell, out in the Cook Strait. So, that could be part of the reason, but I guess if the two things are interlinked and it's rough seas and something falls off the boat, so to speak, well, they probably have to go through a number of checks and stuff, I would have thought.
Maritime New Zealand has issued a navigational hazard warning, saying the containers could be semi-submerged. The Wellington Harbour Master says they could cause a problem if they hit smaller boats. The Harbour Master says the containers could end up at Lyle Bay or Bering Head in Wellington. For Checkpoint, call Kate Gudsall Tēnei.
5:22. Let's go to the desert road now between Waiuru and Turangi in the central North Island, of course, where fire crews have had to cut 4 foreign nationals, 3 of them dead, from the car they were in. The collision left that part of State Highway 1 closed for much of the day. The car appears to have crossed the centre line and then collided with an oncoming truck. Senior Sergeant Fane Troy spoke to our reporter Alex Ashton.
The police are working with local embassies and also trying to locate next of kin. We anticipate that we'll be able to release names tomorrow.
All right, but working with the embassies, which would insinuate that they are visitors?
Would insinuate that they are foreign nationals.
Anything more about the ages of the people involved?
No, they all appear to be aged in their mid-20s.
All right, but don't know if they're related to one another yet?
No, we can't say if they're related at all.
And so did it actually cross the centre line, did it?
From the initial investigation at the scene by a crash analyst, the northbound vehicle has crossed the centre line and collided with the heavy motor vehicle that was travelling south.
What kind of car were they driving?
All I can say is it was a sedan vehicle.
All right, so a small car against a pretty big truck.
Yeah, the fire service had to use cutting equipment to get the driver out and also to get the other 3 deceased occupants out.
So, confirmation there, 4 foreign nationals in the car, 3 of them dead. They are talking to the embassies about this. The driver of the car remains in a critical condition in hospital. (5:24). Coming up, golfer Lydia Ko wins her 4th LPGA title this year. After clinching a playoff in Ohio, Turkey arrests 6,000 people, detains 6,000 people after its coup. And 3 days after the Nice attack, a French mother awaits news of her daughter who hasn't been seen since Bastille Day, as 16 bodies remain unidentified. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Feedback really welcome. Text 2101 if you're a texter. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget our Twitter and Facebook pages. A former US Marine has been identified as the gunman who shot dead 3 police officers and seriously injured 3 others in Baton Rouge. The shooting took place this morning, New Zealand time, 12 days after police gunned down Elton Sterling outside a supermarket in the city. His death has led to days of peaceful protests in Louisiana by supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement. Reuters say a 911 call may have lured police to the shooting scene, but it's unclear whether today's shooting was politically motivated or something else entirely was going on. Our Eurus correspondent Simon Marks has filed this report.
Shot fire, officer down! Shot fire, officer down! The police radios in Baton Rouge crackled into life as the shooting unfolded on Sunday morning. The audio of the gunfire captured by a passerby with a cell phone. Police had been alerted to the presence of a man with an assault rifle walking down one of the city's main highways. When they approached, he opened fire. John Bell Edwards is the state's governor.
The violence, the hatred just has to stop. And it's at times like this I wish the command of the English language that I have were more adequate to the task to convey the full range of emotions that I am feeling.
The gunman who was killed by police has been named as Gavin Long from Kansas City. A former Marine, the shootings took place on his 29th birthday. His motive is uncertain. It's not yet clear whether the attack was in any way tied to the killing by police of Alton Sterling, a black CD trader who was gunned down outside a supermarket earlier this month. His killing has mobilized Black Lives Matter protesters in Baton Rouge. The latest violence just 10 days after a sniper killed 5 police officers in Dallas brought President Obama in front of the cameras again.
The death of these 3 brave officers underscores the danger that police across the country confront every single day. And we as a nation have to be loud and clear that nothing justifies violence against law enforcement.
Donald Trump, preparing for the Republican convention, which gets underway here in Cleveland on Monday, said the president's appearance had shown that, quote, he doesn't have a clue. In a week that will give Donald Trump numerous opportunities to speak directly to Americans watching the convention, he's likely to return to that theme. Our country, he tweeted, is totally divided. Our enemies are watching. For Checkpoint, I'm Simon Marks in Cleveland.
To sport now, and golf, and some good news. Yes, Lydia Ko has done it again. The world number 1 has won her 4th LPGA title this year after clinching a sudden death playoff at the Marathon Classic in Ohio. Ko was one of 3 women in the playoff, which was so tightly contested that it took until the 4th hole for Ko to take it with a birdie.
There it is. At long last, her 14th win on the LPGA Tour, and it was indeed a marathon conclusion.
14 wins on the LPGA Tour. Remember, she's only 19 years old. It's quite extraordinary. Lydia's coach is David Ledbetter. I spoke to him just after the 19-year-old New Zealander had won.
I spoke to her last night, and she, it's tremendous character to show, obviously after what happened at the US Open. So, it's just amazing, really, what the fortitude that this young lady has, and the fact that she missed a couple of short putts. And I told her, I said she loves the game so much she decided she wanted to play a few more holes today. That's what it was.
I think that phrase, the fortitude this young lady has, because she does have enormous fortitude and she is young. And you're right, she had a bit of a wobble. I mean, she went out, the front 9 was fantastic. Then she sort of had a speed bump. But to birdie the 18th when you're playing it for the 4th time in those circumstances, speaks volumes about her, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, look, she's got that X factor there, John, that you can't really put your finger on. She doesn't know what it is, and nobody else does. Nobody else does either. And it's just something that's sort of built within her, and she's able to sort of come out on top when she has to. And she's I mean, it's just incredible what she's doing and what she keeps on doing. I mean, it's just, who knows what she can achieve going forward. I mean, it looks like, as I say, I mean, I honestly think that, she made a tactical error more than anything else at the US Open. And, I mean, it was the one she should have won. But, I mean, it really looks like right now she's going to win every event she enters. So it's just incredible, the vein of form that she's in. And, she just, the frightening thing is I tell people she's actually getting better. Who knows what she can achieve.
Yeah. Well, of course, where I guess everyone now is looking forward to the Olympics because, as you say, she has to go into that favourite or very near favourite. Really, she has to go into it favourite, doesn't she? She's number one in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, look, she's got a week off now, and then she's playing in the Ladies British Open over here at Wentworth, and I'm actually over here. I'm actually going to go with her as opposed to going to the PGA in the US. I mean, it's a bit of a contrived sort of schedule this year. Everything close together with the Olympics being wedged in there as well. But I mean, she really is in a rich vein of form right now, and I can see her. I can really see her winning more tournaments this year, and she's still got 2 majors left plus the Olympics, and I mean she could literally be streets ahead in the number 1 ranking by the end of the year if she carries on at the present rate.
That was Lydia Ko's coach David Ledbetter speaking to us not long after Lydia clinched it. And Ko was today named along with Danny Lee and Ryan Fox in the New Zealand golf team for Rio. Lydia Ko really is fancied as a top chance for a gold medal. It's 5:31 and a half. Coming up on Checkpoint, 6,000 people have been detained, almost 300 people killed and 1,400 injured in Turkey's attempted coup. We'll have the latest on that. Owners of uninsured homes that qualified for the government's red zone offer in Christchurch head back to court again. Our reporter has been there, and the Hurricanes head for a home quarter final after finishing at the top of the Super Rugby table. Who would have picked that on Friday? Quite an extraordinary weekend. All of that coming up. But first, Katrina and Nona with business. But first, Katrina with the headlines.
The teenager accused of fatally stabbing another in the neck with a smashed beer bottle has been found guilty of manslaughter but not guilty of murder. Vincent Angine Skeen, who's 18, had admitted using a beer bottle during a fight with Luke Tepene on Halloween night in 2014 but had denied ever intending to kill. Several members of Luke Tepene's family wept before leaving court. Skeen will be sentenced in August. A passenger on the ferry where cargo crashed through a barrier and into rough seas says it's the worst ferry ride he's been on. Blue Bridge has launched an investigation after 2 trailers fell off the Straitsman ferry from Picton to Wellington this morning. 2 refrigerator units containing frozen pork were lost overboard. A French tourist and passenger on the ferry, Severin Damancourt, says it was a frightening trip. A hunter who was missing in the Blue Mountains near Balclutha since Saturday has been described as being in remarkable condition despite his ordeal. A police search and rescue team found the hunter this afternoon after he became separated from his hunting party on Saturday. John Key will discuss regional security and trade when he meets the Indonesian President Joko Widodo this evening. The Prime Minister begins a 2-day trip to Indonesia today. He says global security will be top of mind for the 2 leaders, but Mr Key says he'll also be looking to discuss barriers to New Zealand's beef exports. New Zealand First says it's not surprising there are allegations of complaints about inferior steel from China being dumped here. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment will not confirm whether it's received 2 complaints from New Zealand producers about Chinese steel flooding the market. The New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, says there have been many reports of imported steel rusting within a couple of years. Those are the headlines. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed. Katrina, let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, the latest inflation data has taken the market by surprise, and this is really material this week, isn't it?
It really is, yeah, because the Reserve Bank last week surprised the market by suggesting that they were going to, not suggesting, but saying that they're going to give a brief economic assessment next week. That was unscheduled and really not unprecedented in the sense that the Reserve Bank doesn't normally come out with interim statements on the surprise. No, they usually signal things. However, there's a good reason, and that's because normally they would release a statement, a scheduled statement every 6 weeks, but they've changed their timetable, so now they're doing it like it's going to be 8 weeks. And those 2 weeks make a very big difference in this kind of an environment.
So, okay, let's look at the data. What were we told today about inflation, and what did it do to the New Zealand dollar?
Well, the Reserve Bank had an expectation that inflation would come in about 0.6%. The market was like a little bit less, so they were saying 0.5, but 0.4 is where it came in, both on the quarter and year on year, which was much lower than what the market was expecting. I mean, 0.4 may not seem like a lot compared with 0.5, but it was enough to move the New Zealand dollar almost a whole cent.
Drive it down.
Which
suggests that the market thinks that interest rates must be cut now as a result to try and stimulate the New Zealand economy.
Yeah, so you think about it, last week, before the Reserve Bank came out with the surprise announcement that they were going to come up with this economic assessment and today's inflation data, the market was expecting about a 30% chance that the interest rates would be cut in August. Now they're betting on 80%. So that's a big increase in the number of market investors who think that the market is that interest rates will be cut. Therefore, the New Zealand dollar took a dive.
Yeah. Boy, this is fascinating, isn't it? Because the Reserve Bank is required to have this in a range of 1 to 3, right? So they're not anywhere near the range that it should be.
And they haven't been for a long time.
For a long time. But everyone knows that if you stimulate the economy too much by offering cheap credit, the Auckland property market will...
It's not just the Auckland property market
you're right,
anymore.
the rest of the country.
Yes.
Except it's the Auckland one that everyone's seriously nervous about.
Well, because, yes, and I think it's actually across the country. Some commentators are saying that you could understand why Auckland house prices are high because there's a supply issue, but not in all parts of the country where we're seeing really strong growth in prices. Yeah. And so, I mean, one of the other things that came out today was the performance of services index, which is an indicator. I know it sounds a bit obscure, but actually some people do pay attention to it. We do. We pay attention to it.
We will now too.
We pay attention to it. And it shows that the service sector is really very exceptionally strong, in fact. And what that is tourism sector, businesses, retail. Retail's really strong. I mean, it's employment in those sectors is very strong. And of course, that points to wage pressures that we've seen other surveys point to, but it's not flowing through into the data. No. So at this stage, we're looking at really low inflation. And so with people having more cash in their pocket because maybe they have had a small wage increase, it's going to seem quite good. Now, of course, the retail sector is riding high on that.
Well, they've borrowed the money, right, with the cheap interest rates, right? What's the New Zealand dollar done and what is the market?
Well, not surprisingly, the New Zealand top 50 index hit another record high today. Well, of course it would because that's what the economy is reflecting there. 7,106, up nearly 0.5% by 33 points. And on the currency, strangely, the New Zealand dollar did actually regain some of the, however, I just want to say it's still got some downward pressure. It recovered quite a lot, and it's trading at 71 US cents, 93.4 Australian, and 53.6 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you. It's going to be the Reserve Bank's Thursday, right?
It's Thursday,
yes. Absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Nona. Appreciate it. It's 22 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. In a bid to reassert its authority, the Turkish government has apprehended more than 6,000 people in a widespread crackdown following the weekend's failed coup. Among those detained are senior military commanders, of course, and thousands of lower-ranking members, while the government has also issued arrest warrants for dozens of judges. About 290 people were killed and 1,400 were injured in the coup attempt. Turkey's president attended the funerals of some of those killed by the rebels, as the ABC's Matt Brown reports from Istanbul.
The mosque near the president's house was surrounded by heavily armed police and special forces. As the call to prayer rang out, its white minarets gleamed in the sun, snipers manned rooftops, and soldiers carrying machine guns with links of bullets across their chests patrolled the footpaths. Given all that's happened, the security was to be expected, but it was also a powerful symbol of 21st century Turkey. The President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, came to eulogise one of his closest advisers, the top media strategist for his ruling Justice and Development Party, who was gunned down by rebel troops along with his 16-year-old son. He broke down in tears as the crowd chanted, "God is the greatest." We have to show these traitors we stand against them, this woman said. We have to honour those precious loved ones we lost. What can I say? I'm more scared about the future now, because terrorists are all over the place, this woman said. I was already afraid, but now that fear has grown worse. Before arriving at the mosque, the President addressed a crowd of supporters outside his house. They were demanding death for the coup plotters, and he agreed, telling them he'll be speaking to the opposition to rush the death penalty back into force. That's troubling human rights advocates. Amnesty International's Andrew Gardner says there are signs the crackdown is going well beyond those directly involved.
Soldiers who were involved in this coup, they need to be detained, they need to be investigated fully, and those responsible need to be brought to justice. But the risk is that the government is going to overstep, as it's done time and time again, and that opposition of all forms will be targeted. The fact that even Constitutional Court judges have been targeted is something very worrying.
And it's not just a purge of prosecutors and judges that's drawing attention. There's anecdotal evidence of violent chauvinism. Roving groups of men attacking people drinking outside a restaurant and telling women not wearing the headscarf that they'll be next. Other gangs reportedly bashed people in neighbourhoods dominated by ethnic and religious minorities or where the left-wing vote is especially strong.
It seems like mob violence, it seems like targeting people who are perceived to be opponents of the government, and this is something that we've seen in the past in Turkey. It's got increasingly nasty, it's led to instances of violence, and of course the fear is that now these instances will get more frequent and marked by increased violence.
In the past, Turkey has been plagued by violence, instability, military coups and oppression, and there's a danger now that, faced with plots against it, the civilian, Islamist-based government could be leading it back down an authoritarian path.
It's 18 minutes to 6. The man who killed 84 people in the French city of Nice on Friday sent a photo to his brother of himself laughing among the Bastille Day crowd earlier in the day. Mohamed Boulel was shot dead by police after driving his truck into the crowd celebrating France's National Day on the promenade. 16 bodies have yet to be identified. The BBC's Tom Burridge reports from Nice.
In churches in Nice and across France, there have been prayers for the men, women and children run down by a lorry on Nice's beach promenade on Thursday night. 18 people remain in a critical condition in hospital, including a 7-year-old Romanian boy who is still in a coma. He was only identified because both of his parents, who were on holiday in Nice, are missing. We now know Mohamed Boulel sent a photo to his brother of himself in the crowd on the promenade just before the attack. He also texted someone who has since been arrested by the police. In the text, Boulel talked about getting hold of more weapons. The lawyer of his estranged wife and mother to his 3 children told French TV that she threw him out of their house after he physically abused her. France's Interior Minister has called up 18,000 police reservists. Police union spokesman Laurent Martin told us the police are clearly overstretched.
Clairement, les policiers sont surmenés, les policiers français sont exténués.
And he said France needs to learn from Israel, where the police have been tackling this type of attack for decades.
Des pratiques qu'il peut y avoir en Israël.
Meanwhile, a woman who lost her 6-year-old granddaughter in the Nice attack is still waiting for news of her daughter, who hasn't been seen since Bastille Day. It's believed she may be among the 16 people yet to be identified. Here's Diane Hodges from Reuters.
Outside the hospitals in Nice, people huddle, anxiously waiting for news of their loved ones. 84 people were killed when a man drove a delivery truck through a crowd of Bastille Day revelers. 85 more are in the hospital. Ines Yeager knows her 6-year-old granddaughter was killed, but she still doesn't know if her daughter is alive.
We've been here for 3 days now, crying out, crying out, crying out, crying out. We're crying out for news. It's not hard. There are photos. It's not hard.
Hospital personnel have been providing support, and French officials have called for a moment of silence. But Yeager says what relatives really need is information.
We don't need a minute's silence. We need 2 minutes information. We want real news because the wait is killing people.
French officials say they're identifying the victims as soon as possible. But for those like Yeager, it's not soon enough.
It's exactly 6:15. Several hospitals have been accused of carrying out cruel and punishing practices on elderly and mentally ill patients. A new report's released today. Investigations by the Ombudsman's Office found some wards used excessive restraints on patients, while in other cases district health boards held patients in seclusion without following proper procedures. They follow concerns raised about the extended detention of an autistic man, Ashley Peacock, last month. Mohammed Hassan has been looking at this.
The investigations were done under the Crimes of Torture Act and involved a series of unannounced visits to hospitals that detain patients. The Ombudsman found an elder care ward in Palmerston North carried out prolonged and excessive use of mechanical restraints on its patients, sometimes by inadequately trained staff. It also found the Waitemata DHB arbitrarily detained one of its patients, a practice the Ombudsman says should cease immediately. The Mental Health Foundation says it's appalled at the findings. Its chief executive, Sean Robinson, says it's time to end the practice of seclusion.
Seclusion should be gone from the mental health services in New Zealand. It is an outdated way of addressing the needs of extremely vulnerable people.
He says he can understand why some staff might feel unsafe or under-resourced and keep patients in seclusion as a last resort.
We've known for over a decade that there's a pathway to moving away from this. If staff are given adequate training, if there are enough staff, if environments are built which actually calm people down rather than create the environment that's going to rack people up who are in distress.
The Waitemata DHB acknowledged the findings and says it will work to enhance patients' access to outdoor areas. The Director of Mental Health, Dr. John Crawshaw, was unavailable for comment, but in a statement says he strongly refuted the assertion punitive measures were being used. He says seclusion is only used in the most difficult and complex cases, and a balance between avoiding harm to the patient and respecting their dignity had to be achieved. The Human Rights Commission raised similar concerns last year. Its Chief Commissioner, David Rutherford, says any health board that holds people in seclusion needs to be held to account.
Our position really is that the human rights of the people who are detained and restrained or detained in seclusion need to be respected. You know, our society will be judged by how we treat those most vulnerable people amongst us, and I think New Zealanders expect some fairly high standards in that regard.
He says a review will be undertaken later this year into the use of restraints on patients.
There are real concerns about the use of mechanical constraints and also what people call chemical restraint, where people may be medicating or over-medicating to achieve the same end. But the findings are very, very concerning. We recognise it's a complex area, but we think we need to take a hard look at what's currently happening, why it's happening, and look at some best practice examples from offshore to see whether we can improve in New Zealand.
The Office of the Ombudsman says the Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boscher, is concerned about the findings from the reports. It says Judge Boscher is also looking at further investigations into the use of extreme measures, including restraints on elderly patients and the use of seclusion by health boards without the proper paperwork. For Checkpoint, Ko Mohammed Hassan Tene.
Owners of uninsured homes that qualified for the government's red zone offer in Christchurch are back in court again, fighting for what they say is a fair offer. In 2011, the government offered to buy properties from those worst affected by the earthquakes, valued based on the value of their land and their house. However, the offer was only made to those with insurance. Colin Young was at the High Court in Christchurch for today's hearing.
Originally, the government offered just half the value of the land to those in the red zone with empty sections or without insurance. Last year, the Supreme Court ruled a person's insurance status should have nothing to do with deciding whether they qualified for an offer, leading to the government offering uninsured homeowners 100% of the value of their land, but still nothing for their homes. 45 people with uninsured homes, known as the Quake Outcasts, are now asking for it to apply the Supreme Court ruling and make them the same offer as those with insurance. Ian Gibson, whose auntie Jean has dementia and was left uninsured when her sister fell ill and failed to pay her premiums for her, says he can't believe they're still having to fight for fair compensation.
It's just intensely frustrating that it's taken this long to work its way, through the court system. We had three courts up to the Supreme Court, all of which were in our favour, and then the government basically refused to follow the Supreme Court's ruling, and we're back now in the High Court again in Christchurch.
The Quake Outcasts lawyer, Francis Cook QC, told the court the Earthquake Recovery Act made it clear that the minister, Jerry Brownlee, needed to pay them out to aid in the recovery of the city.
Penalising people because you're 80 and you forgot to sign your cheque to your insurance company, or you put it in the hands of your aunt and your aunt hadn't done it properly, those sorts of stories. But that's the effect of the decision here. Penalising people for reasons that are justified, and that's really what the Supreme Court has held.
Francis Cook said those without insurance were more in need of a government offer than those with insurance.
Because they tend to be older people, they've not got insurance because they forgot it or it's in the hands of somebody else. They're in the poorer parts of Christchurch.
Outside court, another member of the Quake Outcasts legal team, Grant Cameron, said having decided it wanted to clear houses from the red zone, the government now needed to compensate people for this, whether they were insured or not. He said it was disingenuous for it to claim the money was only an offer and that people somehow had a choice in the matter.
The government maintained that position, but it basically also said to people, look, if you don't accept this offer, we may have to exercise our powers of compulsory acquisition. And so really they were left with Hobson's choice and they had to go.
The latest case is due to wrap up tomorrow and the judge is expected to reserve his decision. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Colin Young tēnei.
Let's go to the States. Republican Party members are gathering in Cleveland for a crucial moment in the American presidential election campaign, the Republican Convention, which begins tomorrow. Barring any unforeseen last-minute challenge, it's there that Donald Trump expects to be formally anointed as the Republicans' presidential candidate. Hillary Clinton's turn comes in a week's time when the Democrats gather in Philadelphia. So what's ahead for the Republicans and possibly for the world? Our US Bureau Chief Simon Marks reports from Cleveland.
This is going to be interesting. Donald Trump's coming out party here in Cleveland is set to be unlike any kind of political convention we've ever witnessed. The faster Republicans have set the stage in the Quicken Loans Arena, the slower Donald Trump's team has been to explain exactly what's going to happen over the next 96 hours. One thing is certain, we will be seeing a lot of Donald Trump. In addition to the candidate's traditional acceptance speech and the balloon drop on Thursday night, he'll also be beaming himself into the convention several times earlier in the week. With so many Republicans wanting to stay so far away from Mr. Trump and his bigoted political rhetoric, he's got little alternative but to pack the agenda with his own appearances and those of his family members. Security around the convention will be predictably tight, but in many ways the biggest question surrounding the event is not whether the barricades will contain the protesters, but whether Donald Trump actually emerges from the convention as the Republicans' candidate. Party strategist Rich Galen says that while some Republicans would still love to dump Trump, their dreams of an alternative are about to be dashed.
I think there's almost no chance that Donald Trump will not be the candidate. 4 or 5 months ago, geniuses like me were sitting around saying, well, how close does Trump have to get to the actual majority, which is 1,237 delegates? If he misses by 30, if he's 30 delegates short, can he still win? If he's 50, can he still win? He's 300 delegates over that number. So the notion of him being stopped in some kind of floor activity just seems to me to be impossible.
Assuming he's right, what of the Republicans' prospects after Cleveland? The opinion polls are all over the map, but indicate the race with Hillary Clinton is still competitive. And some analysts, like former White House aide Peter Emerson, say unpredictable events, a terrorist attack, for example, could create a path for success if, and it's a big if, Donald Trump can control his presentation and rhetoric.
The default position of the American voter is that Democrats are weak on defense. No matter what Democrats do, kill Osama bin Laden, increase the Defense Department, they're weak on defense. Donald Trump has just secured that perception. At the same time, since Donald Trump is a builder, he's also likely stolen a lot of people who are going to vote based on jobs and employment and new opportunities.
That's the optimistic scenario for Donald Trump as conventioneers start to arrive in Cleveland. But unfortunately for him, on the convention's eve, even among top Republican strategists like Rich Galen, there are a lot of pessimists out there.
I think that it is quite likely that Hillary Clinton will be the next president of the United States, although I suspect that Abraham Lincoln will get a lot of votes as a deceased president from people who don't like either one of them.
That's quite a testament to where things stand 4 months before Election Day. But in this unpredictable election cycle, keep your eyes on Cleveland, where anything could happen. For Checkpoint, I'm Simon Marks in Cleveland.
And we will, of course, be there at the convention. When the Hurricanes beat the Crusaders and the Highlanders beat the Chiefs and Argentina's Jaguares somehow beat the top-of-the-table Lions, the final weekend of Super Rugby's round-robin competition finished with the Hurricanes somehow defying gravity and ending at number 1, which means they play at home this weekend and for as long as they might keep winning. Touch wood. And that's not a given. The last time they played their quarter-final opponent, South Africa's Sharks, the Hurricanes lost 32-15. One man who knows what it's like to beat the odds is Hurricanes prop Lonnie Uhila. Born and raised in Tonga in a family with very little money, he'd given up on his dreams of rugby stardom and was doing some building work when a friend turned down a scholarship at Auckland's Sacred Heart College. "You should take my mate Lonnie instead," he said. And Sacred Heart did. The dominoes began to fall. He eventually ended up in the Waikato team, winning the Ranfurly Shield, and then in Wellington making the Super Rugby playoffs. But even those moves up the rugby ladder didn't actually start with rugby.
Moving to Waikato, it wasn't moving because of rugby, or I moved there because my uncle wanted me to come down and work and like picking strawberry and blueberry and stuff. So I moved down there not for rugby, just to work and stuff, and end up going to Hamilton Maris, and they sussed me out with all my visa and stuff like that. So met my wife, and get married. And, a few years later, here I am playing Super Rugby, and wife and 2 kids. So pretty happy with the life at the moment, to be honest.
It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful, and it would be the beautiful icing on the cake of that fairy tale if you if you and the boys manage to kick on. Obviously, you have to stay focused on the Sharks this week because you all know, of course, that it's week at a time, and so how do you maintain your focus on this weekend rather than thinking about what might follow?
We're just taking it as 1 week at a time. It's just like with last week. Last week we wouldn't even look past Crusader last week. Last week we focused on the Crusader and pretty happy with the job done there. And this week there's no further look than the Shark this week. So one job at a time. And this week we're gonna go out there and put up a film there. Hopefully we come on the right end of the field. So there's no further look from this week. So this week is a Shark. So yeah.
It's exciting, Lonnie. What's your weight at the moment? What's your weight sitting at?
I'm sitting at 122 at the moment. Pretty, not too heavy. So trainer and stuff, pretty happy with it. So no, it's pretty good.
Because you're looking really fit. I mean, you were really getting around the field on Saturday.
Oh yeah, everyone said to what did I take last week? So I don't even know what got into me, but I couldn't manage to stop, so I was actually feel good, to be honest.
And I hear on the grapevine that you were that the Canes named you Player of the Day after the game. That must have been pretty fantastic.
Oh mate, Yeah, the boys named me the player of the day, and I was full credit for the whole team. The boys come off the bench and play their hard, and that's what we're doing here, just trying to get your mates back and just look after each other. So get the men of the match, but wouldn't do it without the boys. So yeah.
Good luck on Saturday, Lonnie. We hope you have a wonderful game, and we hope that you get the result for the Canes.
Cheers, John. Thanks for the ring, and I'll talk to you later.
Lonnie Uhila, who's 122 kilos, as you heard him say, and gets up a head of steam. He's called the Tongan Bear, although Corey James says he's the Cuddly Bear. So let's go through the games. Brumbies Highlanders in Canberra on Friday night. Hurricane Sharks in Wellington on Saturday. Lions Crusaders. It's a big distance for the Crusaders to travel. That's in Joburg on Saturday night, their time. And Stormers Chiefs. That's in Cape Town later on Saturday night. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating contest. Lots of people picking all 4 New Zealand teams will make the semis. But actually, they're tough games for all the sides. If you were a betting person, you might fancy the Highlanders against the Brumbies and the Hurricanes against the Sharks. But the 2 teams that have got to go to South Africa have got a lot of work to do. However, we believe in them, Katrina Batten. It's 6 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's lovely to have you with us. Thank you for being there, however you are joining us. In the next 30 minutes, could a major report due out in the next few hours plunge Russia into one of the most explosive doping scandals in sporting history? We speak to Richard Ings, the former chief executive of Australia's anti-doping authority, and a man who knows all about the background to this. A former US Marine from Kansas has been identified as the gunman who shot dead 3 police officers in Baton Rouge. And the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy criticises the government for what he calls a failure to protect France against terror attacks. All of that and more in the next 29 minutes. But first, RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The teenager accused of fatally stabbing another in the neck with a smashed beer bottle has been found guilty of manslaughter and not guilty of murder. Vincent Angine Skeen, who's 18, had admitted using a beer bottle during a fight with Luke Tipene on Halloween night in 2014, but had denied ever intending to kill. Several members of Mr Tipene's family wept after hearing the verdict. Edward Gay has been in the High Court in Auckland.
Skeen's lawyers said their client had acted impulsively, but the Crown said Skeen had literally gone for the jugular and struck Mr Tipene 7 times. The fight happened in front of numerous witnesses, including onlookers on the balcony of a nearby apartment block. Today, the jury took just 5 hours to return its verdict. Skeen will be sentenced in August. Ko Edward Gay tēnei atu I te kōti mātua.
A passenger on the ferry where cargo crashed through a barrier in interrough seas says it was the worst ferry ride he's been on. Blue Bridge has launched an investigation after 2 trailers fell off the Straitsman ferry from Picton to Wellington this morning. Kate Gutzel reports.
2 refrigerator units containing frozen pork were lost overboard, despite being storm-lashed in. Blue Bridge says it's unclear why they moved. A French tourist and passenger on the ferry, Séverin Darmancourt, says it was a frightening ride and people were sick. Although Mr Darmancourt didn't witness the incident, people on board were talking about it. He says that at first people were not sure whether it was a piece of cargo or a person who'd fallen off. Maritime New Zealand has issued a navigational hazard warning, saying the containers could be semi-submerged. The Wellington Harbour Master says they could cause a problem if they hit smaller boats. Call Kate Gutzel tēnei.
A hunter who was missing in the Blue Mountains near Balclutha has been described as being in remarkable condition despite his ordeal. A police search and rescue team found the hunter this afternoon after he became separated from his hunting party on Saturday. Constable Murray Hewitson told Checkpoint there would be a debrief process with the hunter about what happened on the day, but first he would be checked over by medical staff.
He hasn't long moved to the South Island. He's from the North Island, so he hasn't long moved here. So he's never experienced this kind of terrain and climate. Where he's from, it's a little bit warmer and a little bit more open, and as in country. Murray
Hewitson says for what he's been through, the hunter is a lucky man. The gunman who killed 3 United States law enforcement officers in the city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, had posted video messages complaining about the treatment of African Americans by police. Tensions in the city have been high since a black man was shot dead by police 2 weeks ago. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports from Baton Rouge.
The lone gunman who killed the 3 officers has been identified as Gavin Eugene Long, a 29-year-old African-American from Missouri, a former Marine who'd served a 6-month tour of duty in Iraq. He also had an online alias, Cosmo, and posted video messages on the internet, complaining about the treatment of African-Americans at the hands of police and calling for black men to make sacrifices for their race. He apparently recorded one message in Dallas, days after the killing of 5 officers in the city. He called for black people to fight back through bloodshed.
That was Nick Bryant. John Key will discuss the heavy restrictions on New Zealand's beef exports to Indonesia when he meets President Joko Widodo this evening. The Prime Minister begins a 2-day trip to Indonesia today with the Trade Minister Todd McClay and a business delegation. Indonesia used to be New Zealand's second biggest market for beef, but exports have declined by 84% since 2010. A trade deal that took effect in 2012 has reduced tariffs, but there are still non-tariff barriers, and Mr. Key says he'll be looking to discuss those. New Zealand and the United States have taken Indonesia to the World Trade Organization because of the restrictions, and a decision is expected later this year. New Zealand First says it's not surprising there are allegations of complaints about inferior surplus steel from China being dumped here. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment will not confirm or deny whether it's received 2 complaints from New Zealand steel producers about Chinese steel flooding the New Zealand market. But the New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, says it was only a matter of time before a complaint was made. He says there's been numerous reports of imported steel being used for ladders and fencing that rusts within a couple of years. Mr. Peters says industries and politicians are well aware of the situation. In sport, the Crusaders winger Nemane Nandolo has been ruled out of this weekend's Super Rugby quarter-final against the Lions in Johannesburg due to a hamstring injury. Nandolo hasn't flown out of Christchurch with the side after suffering the injury in the Crusaders' 35-15 loss to the Hurricanes on Saturday. Halfback Andy Ellis and lock Sam Whitelock, who were also in doubt through injury and illness, have left with the team. Russia could face a complete Olympic ban if allegations of state-sponsored doping at the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics are proven. An independent commission set up by the World Anti-Doping Agency has been investigating the claims and is due to publish its findings tonight. Russian track and field athletes are already banned from the Rio Games, although individual athletes can compete if they prove they're clean. The head of Drug Free Sport New Zealand, Graham Steele, says if state-sponsored doping is proven, there can only be one outcome.
If it corroborates what we've heard has happened, then in our view the IOC has no choice but to go beyond track and field and stop the whole Russian team from competing.
Graham Steele of Drug Free Sport NZ. The world golf #1, Lydia Ko, has won her 4th LPGA title of 2016 after a playoff at the Marathon Classic in Ohio. Ko, South Korea's Miriam Lee and Thailand's Araya Jintanagan all finished at 14 under and had to play the 18th hole 4 times before a winner was found. That's the news.
This week on Nights, Ariadna. She teaches yoga in prisons. Brian Roper brings his Marxist perspective to Brexit. Shobha Narayan reports in from Monsoonal, India. And Kingi Snelgar, Māori-born, Harvard-educated Indigenous rights lawyer based in South Dakota, who just happens to be the current bison biscuit champion. That's the buffalo version of cowpat throwing. All on Nights this week from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel occasional showers, turning to rain tomorrow evening with westerlies strengthening. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers tomorrow, turning to rain in the afternoon or evening with possible thunderstorms in the west, with westerlies strengthening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, remaining showers, clearing tonight, scattered rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North and Central Otago, showers about Banks Peninsula and Kaikoura until evening, scattered rain for a time tomorrow. Bulla Westland and Fiordland, a period of heavy rain tomorrow, followed by showers and possible thunderstorms. Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, showers clearing. Further rain or showers at times tomorrow with westerly strengthening. And for the Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow. It's 6:09.
Just replying to a tweet from somebody who said, could John's grin be any wider for this story? That was the interview with Lonnie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Should be very wide.
Yeah,
Mine was very wide.
Yeah, we're pretty happy about that.
Fantastic.
We Hurricane supporters.
We Hurricane supporters, so exciting.
Thanks, Katrina. You've just said the time, I won't bother to repeat it. While Russian sports officials have dismissed allegations of a state-run doping program as a Western smear job, it's becoming more and more apparent that it's reality. Doping violations have already seen Russia's track and field team banned from the Rio Olympics. That's big, it's very big. And it seems certain to get bigger. A major report due out in the next few hours looks set to confirm, and I quote, one of the biggest doping scandals in history. We called Richard Ings, the former chief executive of Australia's anti-doping authority, and asked him to explain.
Well, going back about 18 months ago, the World Anti-Doping Agency commissioned an investigation into allegations of systematic doping in Russia by Dick Pounds. That report found very, very serious allegations which prompted the Russian Track and Field Federation to be banned from international competition. Today, we hear the results of the McLaren investigation. This is looking into the more detailed allegations of corrupt anti-doping practices at the Sochi Olympics, whether it happened and what, if any, consequences should come forth if they did.
On the face of it, there's an admission, right, from this guy, Grigory Rodchenkov, who was the Russia's former anti-doping lab director, who's basically told the Times newspaper he was masking, covering up, concealing. It doesn't look good, does it?
Well, no, it doesn't. I mean, the statements of this former lab director of the Moscow laboratory, who also ran the Sochi laboratory during the Sochi Olympic Games, are quite damning. And it's the job of the McLaren investigation to get to the bottom of these very serious allegations from that former lab director, to work out exactly where fact and fiction lie, and to determine if the Sochi Olympics were corrupted or not, and whether any consequences, if any, should apply.
Yeah, and as we know from the Lance Armstrong case, boy, working out where fact and fiction lie is really, really difficult, isn't it? Because people who are drug cheats are also going to lie about that fact. So do you think the report can get to the bottom of this?
Well, we've had a little bit of a glimpse into the preliminary findings of the McLaren investigation. It was a few short weeks ago that the IAAF Council met to make a decision on whether the Russian track and field team should be barred from the Rio Olympic Games. The McLaren investigation provided preliminary findings that indeed that investigation had uncovered elements of state-sponsored corruption with the anti-doping process at the Sochi Olympics. So we're waiting for the full details of the McLaren report today, but it promises to be quite a bombshell.
Yeah, it does. And how big might the crater be left by that bombshell? Is it entirely possible that there will be no Russians at the Olympics?
Look, I think that's a stretch. I think politically and economically, it would be very, very, very difficult to impossible to ban an entire country from the Olympic Games. But if the McLaren investigation finds serious wrongdoing, then there must be consequences at a state level in international sport for the Russian federations involved.
Do you think that this is still going on? Are there other countries doing it? Is this systemic and widespread, or is it being stamped out now?
Well, you know, we all have a hope that the global anti-doping system is solid, that it is trustworthy, that it is doing the job that it's meant to do in all the different parts of the world where it's operating. But sadly, we now must face the realization that it's an anti-doping system that is broken. It's broken in Russia, it's broken in Kenya, it's broken in Jamaica, it's broken in the UK, and we've had issues in New Zealand and Australia as well. It's a system that needs complete review and major reform.
Richard Ings, former ASADA Chief Executive. This is going to be fascinating. The report is out in the next few hours. As New Zealand works to respond delicately to the issue of Chinese dumping steel and China threatens tariffs on New Zealand dairy and wool products should the response become indelicate, what's increasingly apparent is that whatever tensions exist between China and New Zealand on steel dumping aren't unique. Lisa Murray is based in Shanghai and writes for the Australian Financial Review, and she's seen steel dumping tensions play out with a very long list of countries indeed.
It's become a huge global trade issue. The European Commission President was in town talking with the Chinese last week, and he said China must deal with its excess steel capacity or they won't be able to gain market economy status under the World Trade Organization, which is a big prestige issue for China. So that's huge. There have been protests in Germany because the excess steel capacity in China is affecting their industry there. In the UK, you've had steel companies threatening to close. In Australia, we've had our own problems with REM steel and the problems there. So every time the leaders of those countries meet with China, this issue is coming up. And obviously, probably the most aggressive has been in the US, where you saw last month that they've actually approved plans to introduce tariffs of more than 500% on some products because they're so concerned about this excess steel issue.
You can understand the US and China squaring off. That's a much less likely scenario with New Zealand and China. I'm fascinated to see one of the first things Theresa May is doing as Prime Minister is going to Wales and talking to steel workers there. The problem is oversupply, a massive oversupply, and the fact that the prices are very, very low. So no one in this business is making money at the moment, but the prices seem to be rising again.
That's right. So what you had is last year, you sort of had China dealing with the situation. So we all know the basic story that between 1995 and today, China's share of global steel production has gone from 15% to 50%, and that's in line with double-digit economic growth rates, surging economy, and of course, after the 2009 global financial crisis, you had China basically, it would say, came to the world's rescue by pumping up infrastructure spending, and that obviously pumped up the steel industry as well. So then, of course, China's economy starts slowing down in the last 2 or 3 years, and they were starting to tackle this problem of excess steel capacity. But just at the start of this year, there was a big talk that because the economy was slowing down, that the government was a little bit concerned about it, and it was starting to ramp up infrastructure spending again. And steel prices really rallied on the back of that. And what you saw was that some of the steel mills that had closed down in response to this "we're addressing steel overcapacity" policy, they started opening again. So this year, as the steel price recovered, all of a sudden it became a little bit more profitable to have your steel mills ramping up. And so you actually did see, in June, there were record daily steel production levels again in China. So it's a huge issue, and it's one that China says they are addressing. They've announced the merger of 2 of their biggest players, and they insist that production is coming down. But it's just one that the world's really concerned about right now.
And when you are a small economy like New Zealand, when you need to have an open and constructive and productive relationship with China because of everything we export to them, are you simply held hostage by circumstance here? Is there very little you can do?
I think that's right. I think that the sort of leverage China has over economies like New Zealand, like Australia, like other economies, even Britain, is that they do hang the rest of the trade relationship over how this issue is dealt with. I think because there's so much concern across the globe about steel that you can take a stronger stand on that. But New Zealand actually has managed its China relationship relatively well. You know, it signed a free trade agreement I think, nearly 10 years before
Yeah, that's
Australia
right.
managed to do that. It joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, earning lots of brownie points for that sort of show of faith in China playing a leading role in a global financial institution. And I know from living in China that the reception that New Zealand politicians have, the general perception of the New Zealand-China relationship is a very positive one. So they will probably want to play this issue carefully because you don't want to jeopardise some of the other trade in agricultural products and that sort of thing. But I do think with steel that because you're seeing a global level of concern that, you know, there's obviously a leg for New Zealand to stand on in complaining about some of this.
Lisa Murray, who's up in Shanghai with the Australian Financial Review. The new Children's Commissioner, Andrew Beecroft, is backing a report that shows there is bias against Māori in the education system and says he's observed bias in the youth justice system as well. Judge Beecroft was formerly the principal youth court judge. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Aaron Smale spoke to him and the authors of the Unconscious Bias and Education report.
The report is a review of existing research on Māori education. It also compares studies on African Americans, who share a similar profile to Māori on a number of social measures. One of the authors of the report, Kaila Haukamo, says racial bias is more subtle in New Zealand, but it still has a major impact on the success of Māori students.
These days, racism is really socially unacceptable. It's very, very unusual for you to see examples of explicit racism. There's evidence that there's low expectations of Māori kids, and what can happen is the kids start to feel that their teacher doesn't like them so much, they don't get as much attention, they start to withdraw, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Judge Beecroft says the bias the report highlights is also mirrored in other social statistics. In his time working in the youth court, he observed Māori youth getting treated more harshly for the same offences, all the way through the youth justice system.
It struck me when we analysed the education system how in many ways similar the statistics were for the youth court. So at every step in the decision-making process, it gets worse for Māori. Now, the question as to why that is, well, there must be some form of systemic bias or unconscious bias. Hard to accept, but it just has to be true.
He says the bias can add to the risk factors for families that are already struggling.
The 20% that don't do so well, that's quite a long tail. And it's a tale of relative poverty, of marginalisation, of disconnection from education, abuse and neglect issues. Being in that group isn't a script that is for life inevitable. You can say they're risk factors. Nothing's inevitable. But yes, I'm concerned that that group appears to be growing.
Some of the research the report reviewed found that teachers believe the most important factor in student achievement is the home environment. Dr. Haukamo said students themselves told the researchers their relationship with teachers was the biggest influence.
Children themselves are saying, look, it's our teachers that are actually the most important thing. And the teachers saying, no, it's your family and you that are the most important thing. You've got to remember also that these kids might be coming from families that had really similar negative experiences. They might not feel as comfortable dealing with the issues that their kids are experiencing in class or really feeling comfortable talking to their teachers about it.
Dr. Haukamo says a training program to assist teachers overcome bias, Te Kotahitanga, was scrapped by the government even though it was highly valued by teachers. Co-author of the report, Hautahi Kingi, says research on educational achievement of African Americans is a useful comparison with Māori because their social profile is almost identical. He says American research is more comprehensive and clearly shows the link between bias and educational failure.
The data on their respective social and economic situations in their countries there, it's actually remarkably similar. So once you take a look at that, it's actually difficult to not draw the comparison.
The main aim of the report is to assist teachers improve the results for Māori children. For Checkpoint, ko Aaron Smale tēnei.
A former US Marine from Kansas has been identified as the gunman who shot dead 3 police officers in Baton Rouge. The shooting took place this morning New Zealand time, 12 days after police gunned down Elton Sterling outside a supermarket in the city. Here's Diane Hodges.
Crime scene tape seals off a leafy neighborhood of Kansas City, Missouri, where police believe the man who ambushed Baton Rouge law enforcement officers Sunday lived. Government sources familiar with the investigation say 29-year-old Gavin Long is suspected of having killed 3 police officers and wounded 3 others. They say Sunday was Long's 29th birthday and that he was a former U.S. Marine who served in Iraq. At a briefing Sunday afternoon, officials in Baton Rouge said they believed there was only one gunman and that he was killed in the shootout with police. Sources with knowledge of the investigation say a 911 call may have been used to lure officers to the scene. Investigators are looking into the possibility that there may have been a conspiracy. Sunday's ambush is the second attack in a week aimed at police officers. 5 police were killed by a sniper in Dallas at the end of a rally to protest the killing of blacks by police. At a briefing Sunday afternoon, President Obama called on the nation to come together and find ways to end all violence.
The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has criticised the government for what he called its failure to protect France against terrorist attacks. Mr. Sarkozy says the French President François Hollande has failed to tackle the radicalisation of the country's disaffected Muslim youth. Police have now arrested 7 people in connection with the attack that killed 84 people in Nice. The BBC's Lisa Williamson reports.
Nice is now a city of memorials. Rituals to steady a shaken sense of faith. At the Russian Orthodox Church today, they came together across nations and generations. 2 Russian victims remembered among the dead. Their attacker emerging as a violent loner who liked to drink, lift weights and salsa dance. Who last Thursday night reportedly sent a text message to his brother in Tunisia, a selfie from the promenade, laughing among the crowds he was about to attack. Along the famous seafront, there are new places of pilgrimage now. There's a lot of anger among the tributes here, a lot of intolerance, a lot of fear. France has been the victim too many times now, and it's starting to divide over who to blame and how to respond. Nice's deputy mayor says he's asked for years for more police. After 3 major attacks, he says many in France are calling for change.
I am angry too, because after each terror attack we have a speech of compassion. That's good. And after that, government is saying we are going to take decisions. And what happens?
You love Nice. How are you?
I'm very bad. I'm very sad. It's my city.
France's government has described this as a new kind of attack. The motive unclear, the attacker unnoticed. The victims targeted simply for being in France. Don't be afraid, one child wrote. Easier said than done.
The BBC's Lucy Williamson in Nice. A New Zealander has helped to discover a new planet that's 65 times further from the Sun than planet Earth. Michelle Bannister, a Kiwi astronomer, was part of the team who found the dwarf planet from a telescope in Hawaii. This new discovery, currently named RR245, is the 6th dwarf planet to be recognised by the International Astronomical Union. Michelle describes exactly how the team found the planet.
So the way that trying to discover something in the outer solar system works, conceptually, the idea harks right back to when Clyde Tombaugh first discovered Pluto back in 1930. We still use some of the same ideas, but it's become a lot more sophisticated. You take an image of the sky, a relatively wide field image, so you can see as much sky as possible in a single image while going as faint as possible. So these days we like to choose a nice big telescope. Our instrument of choice is the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope on top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. And you take an image of the sky, you come back a little while later, several hours later, and you take another image of the sky. And the stars are stationary, and anything in our solar system will move in that time. An asteroid, something close to the Earth, will move very fast. But an object out beyond the orbit of Neptune, more than 30 times further from the Sun than we are here on Earth, will move across the sky incredibly slowly. You just get this tiny little dot of light going blink, blink, blink.
Who was the first person who says, this is a planet, this is a dwarf planet? At what stage do those discussions start taking place?
Well, one of my collaborators, JJ Cavallars at the National Research Council of Canada, we work in the same office building, and there's several of us around the world who are analysing the images from the telescope on a day-to-day basis. And we have, software that looks at the images to initially give us objects that would be moving across the sky. And then we view them ourselves after the software's done to make sure that, that it is something that's a real candidate for being an object. And so JJ dropped me an email going, "Can you come and look at this?" So I ran downstairs, and there was an object that was much brighter than the objects we normally find, very, very bright, and it was moving very, very slowly. So bright is a good sign. It means it could be big, but slow motion means it has to be very, very distant. And this object is 65 times further from the sun than we are here on Earth. So that meant that it had to be large.
Are you delighted by the response to this? I mean, obviously this is big news, but also...
It's been kind of overwhelming, actually.
Yeah. But doesn't that speak to the sense of wonder? Doesn't that speak to how little we know about the infinity, and that discoveries like these are, a clue to what it's all about?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm delighted that people are finding this so interesting. This object that we've found is among the top 20 largest objects beyond Neptune that we know of. And what's really wonderful about it is that it's one of the objects that allows us to piece together the history of how our solar system formed and then evolved. Because the orbits, the paths that these objects of RR245 and its far now out beyond the sun, that they take, those orbits are signatures of the history of our solar system. They have been moved from where they formed, and they were moved because the giant planets in our solar system, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, have migrated from where they originally formed. So the present orbits of these little icy worlds, if we can find enough of them, is going to let us put together the history of our own solar system, of our cosmic place.
Isn't that extraordinary? Michelle Bannister, who was part of the team that discovered that dwarf planet, that's really exciting work. And it ends Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. Until then, ka kite anō and a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The uncle of a teenager who was stabbed to death in a Greyland street fight says there's no winner in the case after his killer was found guilty of manslaughter. A passenger on the Cook Strait ferry where two trailer units crashed through a barrier and into rough seas has described the trip as crazy. The High Court in Christchurch has heard the government is failing to comply with the law by refusing to pay out 45 owners of uninsured homes that suffered quake damage. And despite a security crackdown banning umbrellas and tennis balls, Ohio's gun laws mean protesters can carry firearms near the Republican Party convention in Cleveland. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Every weekday lunchtime, RNZ National presents in-depth coverage of international news and issues.
I will always do what is correct, whether the individual concerned is an ordinary citizen or a sitting president.